A quiet person is often the last one anyone worries about. They listen instead of arguing. They forgive instead of seeking revenge. They carry the emotional weight of others without asking for recognition. Because of that, the world usually assumes they are harmless. But that assumption can become one of the biggest mistakes anyone makes. While most people spend their time warning others about narcissists, very few stop to ask a different question. What happens when the person who has spent years understanding everyone else finally runs out of understanding? What happens when the person who always chooses peace decides that peace no longer includes the people who keep hurting them? The answer is far more unsettling than most people expect. A narcissist may create chaos through manipulation, control, and emotional games, but a fed-up empath creates something completely different. They become impossible to manipulate. They stop explaining themselves. They stop chasing approval. They stop feeling guilty for protecting their own peace. And once that transformation begins, the entire balance of power changes. The person who once tolerated disrespect suddenly becomes the one walking away without looking back. The one who answered every message now remains silent. The one who always gave another chance suddenly closes the door forever. That kind of change often shocks everyone around them, especially the people who believed their kindness had no limits. The greatest misunderstanding about empathy is that it is the same as weakness. Society often celebrates kind people, but quietly expects them to sacrifice themselves over and over again. Empaths are praised for their patience, their compassion, and their willingness to understand others. Yet those same qualities often attract people who see kindness as an opportunity instead of a gift. Narcissists are especially skilled at finding people who naturally care deeply because they know compassion can be manipulated. They mistake forgiveness for permission. They mistake patience for surrender. They mistake silence for acceptance. What they fail to recognize is that every ignored boundary, every broken promise, every lie, every act of emotional manipulation quietly builds pressure beneath the surface. Unlike explosive personalities who react immediately, empaths often absorb pain for months or even years before reaching their limit. From the outside, nothing appears to change. They continue smiling. They continue helping. They continue making excuses for people who repeatedly disappoint them. Yet inside, a silent transformation is taking place. Trust slowly disappears. Emotional energy begins to fade. Hope becomes exhaustion. One day, without warning, the person everyone believed would always stay simply leaves. Not because they stopped caring, but because caring became too expensive. That is the moment many narcissists never see coming. They expect another apology. They expect another emotional conversation. They expect another opportunity to regain control. Instead, they are met with complete emotional distance. No anger, no pleading, no revenge, just silence. Ironically, that silence often becomes more powerful than any argument ever could. It removes the emotional fuel narcissists depend upon. It ends the cycle they believed would continue forever. That is why many psychologists and relationship experts describe emotional detachment as one of the strongest responses to manipulation. It shifts control away from the person creating the pain and returns it to the person who finally refuses to accept it. This transformation is not about becoming cruel. It is not about becoming heartless. It is about reaching a point where self-respect becomes stronger than the desire to keep everyone happy. It is about discovering that kindness, without boundaries, eventually becomes self-destruction. It is about learning that forgiveness does not require endless access, and compassion does not require endless sacrifice. These lessons are rarely discussed because they challenge the comforting image people have of empathy. The truth is that empathy has limits, just like every other human quality. Even the gentlest heart can become exhausted after carrying burdens that were never theirs to begin with. Even the calmest person can decide that enough is enough. And when that decision is made, it often arrives without noise, without warning, and without a second chance. Throughout this video, you will discover why a fed-up empath often becomes far more difficult to deal with than the narcissist who believed they held all the power. You will learn how emotional manipulation slowly reshapes even the kindest personalities, why narcissists repeatedly underestimate empathic people, what really happens inside the mind of an empath before they finally walk away, and why their silence can create consequences that years of arguments never could. You will also uncover the hidden psychological patterns that explains why this relationship dynamic repeats itself so often, why emotional exhaustion changes the brain's response to toxic behavior, and why many people completely misunderstand the difference between kindness and weakness. Along the way, we will explore surprising truths that rarely receive attention, challenge popular myths about empathy, and reveal why protecting your peace is not selfish but necessary for emotional survival. By the end of this video, the meaning of strength may look completely different from the way most people define it today. Strength is not always loud. It is not always aggressive. Sometimes the strongest decision is simply refusing to keep bleeding for people who never intended to stop hurting you. That realization has ended countless toxic relationships and helped many people rebuild lives they thought were permanently damaged. The final part of this discussion may completely change the way you view both narcissists and empaths, because the greatest source of power is often hidden inside the person. Everyone underestimated from the very beginning. Every section builds on the last, revealing pieces of a transformation that most people never notice until it is already complete. So staying until the end will help you understand the full picture instead of only seeing isolated moments. Welcome to the channel, where we explore the hidden psychology behind human behavior, relationships, emotional strength, and personal growth in ways that challenge common beliefs and encourage deeper understanding. If this is your first time here, subscribe and become part of our growing community, because every video is designed to help you see people, emotions, and yourself from a completely new perspective. Now, let's uncover why the moment an empath finally reaches their limit is the very moment everything changes. The biggest misunderstanding about empaths begins with the image people create in their minds. Society often sees them as endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving, and endlessly available. They are the people who stay calm during arguments, offer comfort when others are struggling, and try to understand both sides before making a judgment. Because of this, many assume they can handle unlimited emotional pressure without being affected. They become the friend everyone calls during difficult times, the partner who always gives another chance, or the family member expected to keep the peace no matter what happens. Their kindness slowly becomes an expectation instead of a choice. Very few people stop to ask what this constant emotional responsibility costs them. Instead, their patience is treated as if it has no limit. Their forgiveness is mistaken for permission. Their silence is mistaken for agreement. Over time, people begin believing that the empath will always be there, no matter how badly they are treated. This belief creates one of the most dangerous misunderstandings in human relationships, because empathy is not the absence of pain. It is the ability to feel pain deeply, often more deeply than most people realize. Empathy is also one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Many people confuse it with weakness simply because it does not look aggressive. In a world that often celebrates loud voices, quick reactions, and public displays of confidence, quiet emotional intelligence is easy to overlook. An empath usually chooses understanding before confrontation. They ask questions instead of making accusations. They search for solutions instead of revenge. To people who measure strength only through dominance, this behavior appears soft. Yet choosing peace when anger would be easier often requires enormous emotional discipline. Remaining compassionate after repeated disappointment demands more strength than reacting with immediate hostility. Unfortunately, manipulative people rarely see it that way. They interpret kindness as an opportunity. They believe that if someone keeps forgiving them, there will always be another chance. They mistake emotional maturity for emotional weakness. This false belief encourages them to continue crossing boundaries they would never dare cross with someone who reacts aggressively. The truth hidden beneath the surface tells a completely different story. While everyone notices the calm smile, very few notice the emotional pressure building underneath. Every disappointment leaves a mark. Every broken promise creates another crack in trust. Every moment spent ignoring personal needs to care for someone else quietly drains emotional energy. Empaths often hide this exhaustion because they do not want to become another burden for others. They convince themselves that things will improve, that people will change, or that understanding someone else's struggles will somehow make the hurt easier to carry. Instead of expressing frustration, they suppress it. Instead of protecting themselves, they keep extending compassion. This emotional pressure does not disappear simply because it remains invisible. It continues growing in silence, becoming heavier with every ignored feeling. From the outside, nothing seems different. Inside, however, emotional reserves slowly begin to disappear. That hidden conflict becomes one of the reasons why people are so shocked when an empath finally reaches their limit. They only witness the calm surface, never the storm quietly forming beneath it. The question that eventually becomes impossible to ignore is simple. How long can anyone continue absorbing pain before that pain begins to change them? Empaths naturally absorb emotions in ways many people never experience. They notice small changes in tone, facial expressions, body language, and energy. They often recognize sadness before someone speaks about it. They sense anxiety hidden behind forced smiles. They can feel tension in a room long before anyone else notices something is wrong. While this sensitivity allows them to build deep emotional connections, it also creates an invisible burden. They are constantly processing not only their own emotions, but also the emotions of everyone around them. In healthy relationships, this ability creates understanding, trust, and closeness. In unhealthy relationships, it becomes exhausting, because the empath keeps carrying emotional weight that does not belong to them. Day after day, they become the emotional support system for people who rarely ask how they are doing. Their own feelings slowly move to the bottom of the priority list, while everyone else's needs take center stage. This constant emotional giving eventually leads to something psychologists often describe as emotional exhaustion or compassion fatigue. At first, the signs are easy to miss. Small frustrations become harder to ignore. Motivation begins to fade. Activities that once brought happiness no longer feel exciting. The empath may become emotionally tired even after spending time with people they care about, because every interaction requires giving more than receiving. They continue helping because helping feels like part of their identity. Yet every act of kindness without healthy boundaries removes another piece of emotional energy. Eventually, they stop feeling refreshed after rest because the exhaustion is no longer physical. It has become emotional. The mind begins protecting itself by reducing emotional investment. What once felt natural starts feeling forced. Conversations become shorter. Excitement becomes quieter. Hope becomes cautious. This is not because the empath suddenly becomes cold. It is because the emotional system is trying to survive. Repeated manipulation accelerates this transformation. Every lie creates uncertainty. Every broken promise weakens trust. Every guilt trip teaches the empath that their own needs will once again be placed second. Slowly, they begin questioning themselves more than the person causing the harm. Gaslighting becomes especially damaging because it attacks confidence from within. Instead of trusting their own instincts, they start wondering if they are overreacting, being too sensitive, or expecting too much. Manipulative people encourage these doubts because uncertainty makes control easier. The empath spends valuable emotional energy trying to understand behavior that was never meant to make sense. They search for explanations, excuses, and hidden reasons while the manipulation quietly continues. This repeated cycle changes their personality in subtle ways. They become more anxious before conversations. They overthink simple decisions. They apologize even when they have done nothing wrong. Their confidence slowly gives way to self-doubt, not because they are weak, but because constant emotional manipulation slowly reshapes the way they see themselves. Every ignored boundary adds another layer of frustration, even if the empath never expresses it aloud. Boundaries are not walls built to punish others. They are healthy limits that protect emotional well-being. When someone repeatedly ignores those limits, the empath often chooses forgiveness instead of confrontation. Unfortunately, forgiveness without change teaches manipulative people that boundaries are optional. Each violation sends the same message. Your comfort matters less than mine. Your feelings can wait. Your limits are negotiable. Although the empath may remain patient, the emotional cost keeps growing. Resentment begins replacing hope. Disappointment becomes familiar. Trust weakens one ignored boundary at a time. This pattern explains why narcissists and empaths often become trapped in the same unhealthy cycle. Narcissists seek admiration, validation, and emotional control. Empaths naturally provide attention, understanding, and emotional support. At first, the relationship may appear balanced because the empath believes kindness can heal emotional wounds. They assume enough patience will eventually inspire change. The narcissist sees something entirely different. They see someone willing to forgive, someone willing to listen, and someone unlikely to leave after the first mistake. What begins as appreciation slowly turns into expectation. Manipulation replaces honesty. Gaslighting replaces accountability. Guilt becomes a tool for maintaining control. Emotional affection appears only when it serves a purpose. The empath keeps investing emotionally while receiving less and less in return. Patience is one of the qualities narcissists misunderstand the most. They mistake it for permission instead of restraint. Every time the empath stays after being hurt, the narcissist becomes more confident that there will always be another chance. Respect gradually disappears because consequences never arrive. They assume the empath will always return, always forgive, and always place the relationship above personal well-being. What they fail to understand is that trust is quietly disappearing with every act of disrespect. Obedience is never being created. Distance is. The empath may remain physically present while emotionally preparing to leave long before anyone realizes it. The breaking point rarely arrives with shouting or dramatic confrontations. More often, it arrives in complete silence. One ordinary day, the empath simply stops trying. They stop explaining themselves. They stop defending their feelings. They stop chasing conversations that never lead anywhere. The emotional investment that once fueled endless patience simply disappears. This change surprises everyone because it looks so calm. There is no emotional explosion, only emotional absence. The person who once fought to save the relationship suddenly finds peace in letting it end. Emotional detachment replaces emotional desperation. They no longer seek approval because they no longer believe approval is necessary for their happiness. This emotional detachment completely changes the balance of power. Manipulation depends on emotional reactions. Guilt works only when someone still feels responsible for fixing everything. Gaslighting works only when someone continues doubting their own reality. Once the empath trusts themselves again, those strategies lose their power. Decisions become guided by logic instead of guilt. Instead of asking how someone else will feel, they finally ask what is healthy for them. That single change transforms every future interaction. The narcissist discovers that emotional control no longer works because the person they depended on has emotionally stepped outside the game. For many narcissists, this version of the empath is deeply unsettling. They relied on predictable reactions. They expected emotional conversations, endless explanations, and another opportunity to regain influence. Instead, they face quiet confidence. Silence becomes more powerful than arguments because it offers nothing to manipulate. Without emotional reactions, the narcissist loses the attention and validation they depended on. Control slips away, not through conflict, but through absence. The empath's refusal to participate becomes stronger than any attempt to prove a point. Walking away marks the beginning of another transformation. Little by little, confidence returns. Decisions become easier because they are no longer shaped by fear of disappointing everyone else. Boundaries become stronger, not because the empath wants to keep people out, but because they finally understand that protecting their peace is an act of self-respect. They become more selective about relationships, paying closer attention to consistency instead of promises and actions instead of words. The desire to rescue everyone slowly fades, replaced by the understanding that people can only change when they choose to. Once healing begins, returning to the same toxic cycle becomes far less likely because experience has taught lessons that kindness alone never could. From that point forward, empathy no longer means sacrificing themselves. It means caring deeply while refusing to abandon their own emotional well-being, proving that true kindness and true strength have always belonged together. The biggest lesson from all of this is that real strength is not always loud. It does not always come from power, control, or the ability to intimidate others. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who quietly chooses peace over conflict, self-respect over approval, and healing over endless sacrifice. An empath is not weak because they are kind. Their kindness is a choice. Their patience is a gift. Their forgiveness is an act of courage. But every gift has its limits. Even the gentlest heart can become exhausted after carrying pain that was never meant to be theirs. Every ignored boundary, every broken promise, and every act of manipulation slowly teaches an important lesson. Kindness without self-respect is not strength, it is self-neglect. The moment an empath understands that truth, everything begins to change. That transformation is rarely dramatic. There are no grand speeches or emotional battles. There is simply a quiet decision that enough is enough. The need to explain disappears. The need to prove their worth fades away. The need to keep fixing people who refuse to change finally comes to an end. And in that silence, they discover a strength that no one expected, especially the people who believed they would never leave. The greatest victory is not getting revenge. It is reaching a place where revenge is no longer necessary, because your peace matters more than your past. That is the kind of strength no one can take away. So, if there is one thought to leave with you today, let it be this. The most dangerous person isn't the one who learns how to fight. It's the one who finally decides they're no longer willing to be hurt. If this video gave you a new perspective, take a moment to support the channel. Click the like button, subscribe for more videos exploring psychology, human behavior, and personal growth, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. We would also love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed this kind of transformation, or have you experienced it yourself? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience could help someone else who is going through the same journey. Finally, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.